are MythVision.
Did you read that?
How? There's not just Paul and his Roman guard. You know, there's 2 or 3 of his friends, plus all the other prisoners. You know, it's just absurd. So somebody has sort of like an empty hotel in this Roman Paul. Oh, yeah, and we happen to be Christians. Come and stay with us a week. You know, it just doesn't work.
And it parallels the Gospels some. Like this, what you just described, like parallels Jesus in so many ways. Even in all of this, like even in like the Gospel of Mark, where the added part of the serpents, you can be bitten by tread on serpents or bitten by serpents. You can tell this is Pauline, but also him going to before Herod. I mean, he went to a different Herod, but he ends up before Herod, and Herod's like, I don't see any problem with this guy, and you know he doesn't appeal to Caesar, so to speak. But later in the story, it doesn't take long before they're going, we're going to go to Caesar, the Jews. So there's some weird parallels. They're not identical, but they're there.
Yeah, the story, as you correctly point out, the story echoes earlier stories over and over and over. You know, it's like, well, I've often used on my website, why waste a good yarn? You know, they have a little snippet of a story, and they reuse it again and again and again. It echoes in all the other stories, and it shows. You know, they're not even great original story writers. You know, they're not dreaming up a new wonderful story. They're just taking an earlier story and moving the furniture around a little bit. You know, that's all they're doing.
What would happen if we removed the Book of Acts? I mean, even the We version, all that. What if we just remove the Book of Acts? What will we know about this guy, Paul?
Very little indeed. Very little indeed. We'd know something. If we judge the epistles to be genuine, then we know something. But the story is then very truncated. It's really just around the shores of the Aegean. You know, so there's none of this drama. I mean, Acts is almost like a soap opera, isn't it? It's a soap opera. It's simple enough for the simplest of people to follow. You know, it's people coming and goings, and you know, but none of it has credibility as a historical event. That's why, I mean, I don't care if people have a Christian religion and believe a lot of nonsense. What has it got to do with me? They can believe what they like. But but if we are looking at history, you know, then we've got to say there's nothing to substantiate this entire story. There really isn't. Really isn't. And I'd like it, on occasion, I'd like to find something that actually sort of hit the button, that actually was genuine. But what convinces me more than ever that none of it is the fact that nothing ever fits. Nothing ever fits in with real history. You look at, say, you know, the geography of the Holy Land, and all the places where, well, we get, you know, drifting off on Jesus, but Jesus, of course, goes to all kinds of towns, but they're just the towns that we don't know of. All the towns that are there, well, they don't get mentioned, you know. I mean, we have a big town called Sepphoris that's only a few miles from Nazareth. That existed. That doesn't get mentioned. This little town called Nazareth, well, that's the one that gets mentioned, although we can't find any evidence that it was Nazareth in the first century. You know, why doesn't Paul go there? Why doesn't he go and see where his Lord was born? Well, perhaps he doesn't even know that story.
Wow. Yeah, that's a good point. I really enjoy those type of ideas because it really screws the whole thing up when you don't see it like that, you know?
Yeah, you've got to have I don't know, just a warm feeling that it's all really a true story, and we're just we use our faith to make it all make sense. If we have faith, then, you know, you can square the circle, you know, you can turn a triangle inside out. You can do all kinds of things because, well, faith makes, you know, contradictions between the Gospels. Oh, well, that's no real problem, you know. We're not worried about that. You know, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. if you don't have that willingness to be gullible, then you do have a real problem seeing this as a real story.
What about Paul? I love this one. I'm sure you got a few of these. Paul seems to be quite obsessed in many places with not only defending that he's not a liar, but also that he seems to poke at the super apostles. He there's something wrong with, and this could be simply like these charlatans, like you said, if they're authoring this in the name of a guy named Paul, they may be trying to override the validity of an original movement by suggesting, yeah, we know about them, because he can't deny them something to keep part of this thing. But he seems to constantly talk crap about the 12 in a way. And most Christians overlook that he's like, and the super apostles, or, claiming anyone who teaches another gospel other than the one in Galatians, then the one he preaches, let him be accursed, he has to say that twice. So, and then he right then goes into the breath of Cephas and James, and it's like, what's your problem with these guys? What's going on with these? And we have letters written by these people, which once again, here goes another people writing in the name of, and it's like, hold on. James wrote letters. Peter supposedly wrote letters. All these people are writing letters. Paul's writing letters. But Paul talks crap about this James guy who's in the same book, the canon, and this Peter guy is like a goon of this guy James, and somehow the church has rectified it by making the book of Acts coming later. Let's make this thing, together. I doubt that if there were historical, if we were to just presuppose, let's just not argue that point for just a second, I bet, and you'd probably agree, that these guys never rectified, never saw things eye to eye, and never probably agreed. The book of Acts makes it appear like, Paul came in and he took a Nazirite vow or whatever it was, and
yeah. But Acts is clearly an attempt to heal rifts, cover over divisions. Yes, it is. It also suggests it's a later work. It's very clear because it's trying to do a tidy up, harmonizing operation on very irregular, badly fitting parts of what they've composited together. It's clear. I mean, if we bear in mind that the Christian story of first Jesus, then his disciples, then the church follows. In some harmonious progression is all bogus, right? You have various factions under various different names, Nazarenes and Marcionites and various churches. They're all in competition. They're sort of competing with other non-Christian religions as well, and there's no harmonious story, but there are victors at certain stages. And if we allow in a period of at least a century, there are certain stages where maybe a movement is popular at one stage, 10 years later it's disappeared. You just think of religious groups now, they move on. Look at the history of the Mormon church and how it's split into so many different, latter-day churches of different description because somebody jumps up and says, I want to be leader, and somehow there's a rift and there's and a separate church is born. I mean, it happened back then as it happens now, so there is no real story as it would be intended, but there is a whitewashed story, which, of course, you're absolutely right. Acts is that document that tries to do that, tries to present it all, but it sets up a terrible contrast. If the contrast between Paul as he comes across from the epistles ascribed to him, and Paul as he appears in the Acts of the Apostles. You're looking at two different characters here. The one in the Acts of the Apostle is a team player. He's a good guy. He goes to the temple with the 12. But, in his own, as you say, Paul owed nothing to any man. It came from Scripture and his own inspiration and so on. So he's a bombastic bully, the one who wrote epistles, but he's Mr. Nice Guy. who actually has a very passive role. You don't know whether he's active or passive. He's taken places in Acts of Apostles. He's delivered here. He's taken there. They took him back to Tarsus to get him out the way. But the real Paul wrote epistles. He doesn't get taken anywhere. He's the guy who decides where people go. So that's what happens when you try and harmonize what can't really be harmonized.
Like Galatians, when he says, "I told him to his face."
Yeah,
absolutely. And in Acts, it's like, and me and Peter were cool, and they had questions, and I paid for the 4 guys' vows, and we're cool. And James was like, "Oh man, you're on the same team, cool, high five. All right, go do what you were doing, man. You're cool with the law." And then Paul's like, "Screw the law, don't obey the law. The law's the enemy." It's like, dude, what is going on? Yeah, I totally agree. I think this is so. I love this stuff though, because it really opens up my mind.
I mean, there is a basic, I think, reality. The fact, Mark 1 of the story, not reference to the Apostle Mark, but Mark 1 of the story, Jesus appoints 12 men. He gives them the power over spirits and to heal people. He commissions them to take the faith across the world, right? And then you read, hang on, we're all on Paul now. They've sort of disappeared. They've been not only marginalized, they've been basically forgotten. I mean, 7 of the 12 don't even get any sort of write-up in the Acts of the Apostles. They disappear. That's why probably very few Christians could name them. They're non-entities. They should be the most famous people in history, But no, then Mark 2 of the story it's about Paul spreading the faith, not the 12 spreading the faith. So it's a major rewrite, and I think it illustrates, I think, by that stage, the church in the early 2nd century, the church had set up its little enclaves. It had its little congregations. It had the beginnings of elders and bishops, and then it needed to legitimize where it had come from. They couldn't just say, "We've just devised a new religion." They had to give it a backstory, and Paul was the backstory.
That's why you see Paul in the Gospels. I mean, this is a interesting. To me, it's just interesting because what really helped me originally deconstruct was when I saw patterns repeat themselves in Old Testament stories, and then saw it in the New, and that's what made me go, hold on. You're telling me that this literally happened? And it's happened literally 3-4 different times in this, everything from the 72s and the numbers and even elements that played a role, like in Moses' story was like fire by day or fire by night and cloud by day. These same elements were in Elijah and Elisha's story, Moses and Joshua, and then of course John the Baptist were Jesus and the church. And I saw these patterns and themes from Adam and Eve to Abraham and just said, dude, either God is so beyond, okay, that he somehow was able to do this, which when I was a believer, I mean, for crying out loud, you accept almost anything because you're like, this just makes it that much more brilliant. Or you go with the what plausible explanation is, these guys knew their stories quite well, and they knew how to write stories. And, I watched the movie Iron Man, and I can look and go, wow. I watched that movie Iron Man leaving there really wishing there was a real Iron Man that could do the things the movie shows, Like, I wish this was true, Do we have that technology? Not yet, I don't think. But nonetheless, I'm like, dude, what if there is an Iron Man? It's so hocus pocus, though. It's like abracadabra. So is there anything else about Paul that we should know that you can think of that's some funny things? Because you bring light to it. I think it's funny that you don't just point out issues. You kind of make it, I guess to say you poke fun at it, and I like that because you try to make humor.
Well, I do that as a byproduct. The fact that it is so transparent, it is so silly in many ways. Yes, I should have been able to find evidence, having gone all these different places where Paul went, and yet you don't find evidence of the story. You find evidence of how the fraud was concocted. That's the evidence that you get. The fact that you can find Paul's elbow in about 4 different places in the Mediterranean. The fact that this shipwreck on the island of Malta. Well, that's only what the Roman Catholic says. The Roman Catholic Church says. Greek Catholic Church has an island in off the coast of Dalmatia. That's where so. Well, which one was it then? Well, it depended which side you backed during the Crusades. Because when the Byzantines had those islands, it was there. But when the Western armies took over, it moved to Malta, didn't it? And you just see the transparency of this damn story. The trouble is, of course, people don't want to get into that level of detail of really fact checking. It's just there's a promise there, isn't there? There's a promise there that you'll live forever if you accept Jesus. There's a promise that you'll meet your loved ones. It'll all be happy, hunky dory, and if you're so damn committed to that idea, it makes it an uphill struggle for those of us who say, well, look, tell me the truth, whatever the truth is, that, and of course, plus the fact people who push the religious agenda are making a good living out of it. That's why.
That's true.
Even dear old Bart Ehrman, he's proved many times how fraudulent the Christian story is, but he still clings to. There's an historical Jesus. Yeah. He knows which side his bread is buttered, doesn't he? So.
He's good at it. I'd laugh if the church has locations for his foreskin. Can you imagine Paul, the apostle of Christ? His foreskin is located over here. I mean, this guy was so against circumcision in his letters, and then it's just so crazy. But doesn't Acts even play out this funny, interesting role? This tells you, in my opinion, the church that the time the book of Acts is written is clearly trying to say you don't have to be circumcised. It's clearly saying this because Paul is arguing with Peter, and I've heard this explained so many times, and this is a huge Protestant Catholic debate. This is from someone who comes from inside of the Kool-Aid drinking box, okay? And while I was in there drinking this Kool-Aid, watching Catholics and Protestants debate, they argued every time, and the Protestants would point out something. It's almost like what's his name? Matthew Dillahunty says. He says, if you want to know how a religion's wrong, ask another religion. Well, the Protestants will make this argument and go, oh, you say Peter had the keys of the, he's the first pope. You think he's the first pope. How did the first pope get it wrong then when Paul came up? Because it's really Paul against Peter. If you go to the Roman Catholicism, represents Peter technically, and Paul, represents the Protestant, or what Protestants really took over later. They always go to Paul and use really grace through faith, not of works. Well, I thought this was interesting that they make Paul rebuke Peter, who Jesus hands the keys to the kingdom to. It's like, what's going on here, dude?
Yeah. It makes you smile if you can think rationally about something which many people don't even want to be questioned. I mean, they don't want this stuff questioned, and if they're sufficiently enlightened to consider ideas, they'll need huge amounts of convincing. It's like they're presenting a silly idea, but they expect a huge quantity of very rational evidence ever to question that idea, whereas it should be, on the face of it, questionable in itself. The arguments made for religious claims, walking on water, whatever it might be, that is a questionable claim. You don't need a huge load of evidence to prove that is wrong, but religious people are so committed that that's the bell. That's what we have to take on that challenge, don't we?
I legitimately dealt with this. What you're saying here just the other day. I told the guy that scholars it's pretty much a universal consensus that critical scholars say Abraham didn't exist. And this guy wrote me literally, and I had to post it in this mythicist room, mythicist versus historicist Jesus room. And he says that's a lie. The historical Abraham did exist. I know because Jesus, I've met Jesus. Jesus, the historical Jesus, took me to see the historical Abraham, and I met him. You may not believe me, he said, but this is the case. And I just simply, being kind, wrote back, were you taking dimethyltryptamine or are you on drugs?
Yeah, yeah. Thankfully, we probably don't have too many of that type of Christian in this country, because actually Christianity is quite a minority cult within Britain, and within Europe, I'd say. As we said, I think on the last time we spoke, it's America that's holding out for Christ. You're sort of regimented and so conditioned to believe in what is basically a very primitive set of ideas. I mean, we've had the Enlightenment, we've had the age of science. Science now plots the furthest reaches of the universe, and to believe in this, God from the Bronze Age, and a quaint but copied story, regurgitated story with just a different hero from 2,000 years ago. Well, men of science don't entertain it, do they? The educated elite don't entertain it, but the populace entertains this idea.
I think a lot of it applies to patriotism. And look, my father, and I'm not against that. My father's a Green Beret. He retired Special Forces. But growing up, I had this sense of connecting my pride, American pride, and being pro-military, pro-America to my Christianity. And the fact that they, I guess you could say, politically intertwined. I grew up very conservative. I no longer vote. Now, I get people who are on the opposite side who are looking at me going, you stupid, the non-voters are the reason why we didn't win, and this and that. I'm like, it's, for me, I mean, I couldn't vote not long ago because I was a drug addict who made some mistakes. I lost my rights, but I'm kind of glad I did, because personally, I don't know. I don't want to get involved in it because it feels like religion. I'm not trying to say that there aren't political things we should probably, try to stand up for and vote for, that we want change in the world, especially when it comes to freedom of religion and thought, and not teaching that Jesus created the earth 6,000 years ago in school. Okay, don't dumb our kids down. At the same time, I feel like it's the same veracity that comes into Paul and all these things that we do religiously and arguments and debates is the same thing politically I witness in America of Republican versus Democrat. And it's like, yeah, we're not saying the name Jesus, but it feels much like religion. And I'm like, I try to, I'm happy. I'm happy where I'm at.
No, I empathize with you when you say that you don't vote, because most of my life I've never voted, to be honest. To me, I never saw any political movement that I could endorse so hardly to even go and vote. And our politics has become weird in the same way that your politics has become weird. Dare I say, your politics is even weirder than ours. But,
it's so bad. Riots. I mean, like, we're talking hate. If you voted for the opposite side, there's literal hate of you. It is like the 50s with black and whites, except it's no longer a race thing, so to speak, even though there is some of that some places. It's now become, are you wearing an elephant? Are you wearing because you had the Republican symbol? Are you wearing a Democrat? I just stay out of it, man. I wish that it wasn't like that, because I'd love to go vote and say, hey, I feel like I believe in what these people are doing all the way across the board, but, choose which evil, lesser evil, or I just kind of don't get involved, if that makes sense. I do this right here. I deconstruct people, and people who watch this go, wow, okay, I no longer have to think like that.
I think you're doing a grand service. You really are. And you have dare I say, You have a lovely manner. And it's great to talk to you. It really is. It really is. You have an open mind, but you're sensible.
I try to be. I don't want to be mean.
I'm not trying to sound patronising, but I sometimes get interviewed by, like, I've been invited to appear on Christian stations, and you from the word go, it's like, all right, we're gonna have an issue here.
I love that, though, because I know exactly what you're talking about. I actually was invited to speak on a show recently with a guy named Asher, and he's a rabbi, and now he's a rationalist rabbi, which he's like, what are you? I'm like, I'm agnostic. I guess by definition, I'm an atheist, though, because I don't worship a God. But whether there is something out there, divine or something, I don't know. I mean, I don't believe in that. And he's like, well, I'm an agnostic, even though I do believe that there may be a God, the God of the Bible, which the Hebrew scriptures is Yahweh. And he went in this interesting thing. I had never heard a Jew take this type of position. He even goes so far as only the 5 books. And he says that the prophets were only written during a time, and they were only meant for a specific time for specific people. However, he believes that what happened is when they took away rights to read Torah to the Jews Israel used the prophets to get as much of the law out of the prophets as they could till they were allowed to go back to 5 books, and they elevated the prophets on a level equal to Torah when they never were. So there's so many complexities just in the presuppositions to what we find in the New Testament. It's like, okay, dude, like, if you really just think this thing made it and it was good to go, you got more faith than anyone I've ever met, because that's serious faith once you start seeing the critical stuff we're looking at here.
Yeah. Most talking of the Jews, most Jews of my acquaintance in this country are actually quite secular. Sometimes I get a bit annoyed when people speak of the Jews, particularly the ancient Jews, as if they all agreed, and they all agreed with their rabbi. They all agreed with the temple priests, like they were just one herd. Now, there was maybe that tendency, but, by gosh, there were lots of divisions within the Jews. A lot of Jews became Romans. They embraced the pagan religions. The idea that there was just one homogenous Jew is just ridiculous, And some most outstanding writers have been atheistic Jews, for Christ's sake,
That's true. Ken, how can people help support what you do or get your book? Is there a website? Is there a YouTube channel? What do we got here, boss?
Yeah. Well, let's not forget. Get the book. It's a very thick book.
Lots of information.
But it's very readable. It's very readable. That's probably the most helpful thing people could do, because at the end of the day, I don't need a new television. But, it's nice that the people get the word out. That gives it, like you say, many people will make the comment, I hadn't thought of that. They just hadn't challenged even just a very basic proposition. Jesus never existed. It might, didn't he? I've never thought of that. I assume because everyone goes around speaking about Jesus, he was a historical character, but he's no more real than William Tell or King Arthur, all the other mythological characters of history. But of course they don't have a religion stuck upon them, do they? I mean, I'm often struck. It's getting into a little bit of the detail, but I'm often struck the difference between following what the Jews did or didn't do, and maybe say the tribe of the Iceni in Eastern Britannia at the same time. Nero had to send his legions into Britain to knock the. Now, would we embrace an ancient British god? Would we entertain that there was someone walking around? It's just so arbitrary that this story, out of a little sub-province in the Roman Empire, produced the world's truth. It's simply an historical accident. That's all it was, Constantine was backing Apollo. Then he thought, give this Jesus God a chance, and something the church was in there, into the corridors of power.
I personally think that there was a temptation to go toward a monotheistic tendency that unified one thought. Because one might go, well, Apollo, why are you leaving out such and such? Or why are you leaving out? Why not come at it from a view that eliminates all gods, so you can't have your different flavors, and everyone tastes the same cup of tea? So let's get under one flag, one idea, one mind, and everybody could be controlled with the same pretty packaged. Yes. I mean, look, and Jesus is so similar to we did that show with Dr. Bob. He's so similar to these other pagans that some of the church fathers actually argue that point. Hey, just like you believe in Apollo and his virgin birth, believe in Jesus and his virgin birth. It's like, yeah, why can't I? I could see a pagan going, you know what? Good point. Yeah. I'm going to your pagan, or he probably didn't call it pagan. We call it pagan, but I'll go check out your God then. Cool. They were into that stuff. So
yeah, the polytheists were both tolerant of each other, but had very similar ideas to what the Christians tried to monopolize and did monopolize, and then their bishops became the top dogs. And it was a totalitarian system, or an attempt to force a totalitarian system on the Roman Empire. And that was, to the Roman emperors, very appealing,
Yeah, but very damaging too. They collapsed not long after that, so...
Absolutely.
If anything we can take away is, guys, be skeptical. Check out Ken Humphreys' book. I appreciate you joining for the show. This was a wonderful podcast.
It's been a pleasure. You take care now.
Yep, and if you guys have any questions, you have any ideas, anything you want to hear from Ken, let me know. I'll try and prepare for the next show that we do with him. I'm always a fan of his work, and obviously what you produce is not only educational, but you have a sense of humor about it, and that's what I appreciate. You're not just rude and mean. You're rude, mean, and nice at the same time. Thank you so much. Well, we are MythVision.